I've wanted to title this something like In Defense of Globalism or Against Zulu Nationalism. And I want to paint a picture for you. You may have seen that film, that scene where the Zulu, the empire, the Zulu Empire of Africa, are charging at British soldiers. And the British mow them down, and you get a lot of white nationalists who praise that scene, or they're happy with that scene because they don't like diversity, and they view that scene as anti-diversity. What's interesting about that scene is the degree to which it is a mercantile supremacist scene. See, the Zulu, they're warriors, they're honorable, they're powerful, they have skills, and they have unity, and they have leadership, and they have courage, and they have fearlessness. They have all these traits that make them aristocratic, and they charge against the British, and the British have virtually none of that. The British are hiding in their little encampment with their gunpowder and their guns, and they shoot at the Zulu, and they mow down the Zulu in mass numbers. They have no intention of meeting the Zulu on their terms. They have no intention of saying, oh, well, the Zulu only have spears, so I guess we should just use spears. It's this totalistic pragmatism where the object is to win for the glory of her queen's riches, the wealth of the British crown. Not honor, not virtue, not aristocracy, but just killing all the Zulu so that you can extract the resources of the land, extract the wealth of the land. And this is what people are faced with in their daily lives, where they feel like, hey, I'm a valuable person, I'm a virtuous person, I do the right things, I want to live in the Shire, I want to live among my own blood, I want to live on my own soil, I want to have my own farm, I want to work the land. And people have these fantasies of what they would like to have, and they're angry that they are not permitted, they are not allowed to have access to the soil. They're upset that they're not permitted to live among their own. They're upset that they're not allowed to be free from technology. They're upset that they are being infringed upon by global capitalism, that they're being infringed upon by governments and corporations and these mega billion-dollar power structures, these financial systems around the world, these banking systems. They don't like that. They don't like the abstraction. They don't like the mercurial nature of things. They don't like the domination of the merchant class. So what they would like to return to is some kind of warrior aristocracy. But you see, the anti-Shire, the anti-Hobbit realm that we live in. The world that we live in now is a product of the British Empire. It is a product of Europeans globalizing the world. Europeans invented globalism. Globalism did not exist before Europeans. In a true sense. Now, there were other aspirations for globalism. Maybe the Chinese thought about conquering the world, or the Jews thought about, they write in the Torah that one day all the nations, all the Goyim, will worship Yahweh, and the Jews will be like priests unto the Goyim. So, there are aspirations of globalism, but Europeans are really the first group of people who ever went out to all the different continents and established rule and established empires and established rule of law and trade and this financial system. So, yeah, I guess you can balk at that and you can say it's not a good trade and you want to go back
back in time, turn back the clock. But then you have to be sympathetic to the Zulu. You have to admire the Zulu. You have to identify with the Zulu. And it's very strange to me that you have people who are advocating for nationalism, you have people who are advocating for anti-technology, traditionalism, return to the soil, return to agrarian life, aversion to globalism, aversion to the merchant class, aversion to finance, aversion to abstraction. They want to get back to a more naturalistic way of doing things. And I'm like, all right, well, who is closer to that in the British versus the Zulu? It's got to be the Zulu. You got to sympathize with the Zulu in that case. And that's sort of what Alexander Dugin does, is he sympathizes with African nationalists. He sympathizes with indigenous people in a way that white nationalists do not. White nationalists are these hypocrites usually, because on the one, they want their cake and they want to eat it too. They want to have the benefits. They want to be able to colonize other spaces. They want to be able to have their South Africa, to have North America, to have South America, to have Australia, New Zealand. They want to be able to colonize these spaces and recolonize these spaces, and yet they also want to have the Shire. They want to have Hobbiton. You know, you can see this in Tolkien's writing. You can see his Harad in the land of Middle-earth. Harad is just Africa, okay? And then you have the Easterlings, who are just like Mongols, Asiatic peoples. And Mordor is basically Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. And so the struggle between Mordor and Gondor, Mordor and Rohan, really just represents the essentially Rohan, Gondor being Rome, being Italy, Rohan being Germany, the Germanic tribes, the migratory nomadic tribes. So those two tribes, the Italians and the Germans, fighting against the Ottoman Turks. Okay, that's all Lord of the Rings is about. It's a very simple thing. So Tolkien, he wants the Shire, but he also wants Gondor and Rohan to reign supreme. And the thing is, when you start colonizing other peoples, and when you start destroying culture after culture after culture, and you homogenize and you globalize, it sort of comes back to haunt you. It reflects upon itself. It begins its own self-criticism, its own self-globalization, its own self-colonization. Europeans are colonizing themselves. They're deconstructing themselves in the same way that they deconstructed other people. Europeans are now calling themselves superstitious. Oh, Christianity is superstitious, in the same way that they went to Africa and they went to South America and they went to China and they said, oh, that's baseless superstition, that's heathenry, that's paganism. So this European tendency to otherize the other cultures of the world has been reflected back on Europeans. Now you can blame Jews, I guess, but Jews are merely fitting into a niche that was created by Europeans. If Jews didn't create civilization in the modern world and technology and all these things, Jews wouldn't have had a place. If you didn't have international finance, if you didn't have banking, Jews wouldn't have a job. So Europeans created this scaffolding, and this scaffolding required usury, and it required people to come in and be greedy, and it required people to be cutthroat, and it required people to think abstractly, and it required people to be mercurial. It required this mercantile personality. And Jews, by their desire to survive, were coaxed into this role, essentially. It's not that they were forced. I mean, they could have chosen to die out, or they could have chosen to be like the gypsies who have no power, but they didn't choose that route. They chose the path to power, and the path to power was filling this desperately needed niche. But it was created by Europeans. It was the European princes and the European bishops who borrowed money from moneylenders. And so Jews looked at that and they're like, hey, money lending's a pretty good profession. Maybe we can become powerful through this. Maybe we can lift ourselves up, not be a subjugated people. We can be a powerful people. So, none of this is possible without Europeans in the first place. There is a primacy to the European role here. The idea that the Europeans were just dancing and laughing in the Shire, and then all of a sudden these terrible people came and they messed everything up. No, that's not how it was. It was Europeans, through their own colonialism, had an innate, you can say, a Faustian spirit. And I would even, distinguish here, Spangler will separate Greco-Roman civilization from medieval civilization. I think you look at the Greeks and you see this Faustian colonial spirit. I think you look at humanity as a whole and you see that. But there's something particular to Europeans that they just want to continually expand. And when you're continually expanding, that sense of infinite growth really lends itself, and it's really one and the same with capitalism. And that need for growth and that need for capitalism then creates a role for usury. It creates a role for mercantilism. And I don't know if you can exactly blame certain Jewish folks from stepping into that role that was created by European civilization. So I don't know. I guess, you can argue the morality of it all day, or who's culpable, who's not culpable, whatever. But the fact is, if you wiped out a certain group of people, you wouldn't solve any problems. All you would do is you would exclude a certain group of people from the economy or whatever on the basis of race or religion or some kind of collective identity. But then other people would step into that role, There are plenty of European con artists who would step into that role. And there is a capitalistic demand for people who are abusive, people who are usurers, people who are illusory, people who are mercurial, people who seem good without being good. That's Bernie Madoff, right? He seems like he has financial power when it's just a pyramid scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme. So there's this demand for that, and you can eliminate as many people you want. The thing is that evil is supplied because evil is demanded, right? There is a positive desire for deception, and so deception is supplied. If people weren't demanding and clamoring to be deceived, then there would be no one to step into the role of deceiver. So, I guess you've got nationalists who cheer on the scene in Zulu. Oh, look, they have this superior technology and they're using it to defeat the Zulu. I mean, the Zulu, to be honest with you, the Zulu are very sympathetic in a way because they've worked hard to get where they are. They have a lot of skills that are instinctively appealing. They're fit. They're a fighting force. They have that warrior ethos. And so most men instinctively can identify something in common with the Zulu. And then you've got the British who are there with their technology, with their guns, and they're just mowing people down. And, I guess there are some sick people who look at that, and I guess it's your perspective, but there is something sick and sort of like a Dexter, not a Dexter the serial killer, but like Dexter's Laboratory. I'm thinking of like the Elliot Rodger type, or this brain in a jar, or the Pinky in the Brain. I'm trying to think of this nerdy archetype, the kid who is bullied in school and then he becomes the evil genius or something. So you have this stunted personality which looks at the British and identifies with the British because they're like, haha, these high IQ alpha males, they can't beat us anymore. We're gonna use technology, we're gonna use weaponry, we're gonna use our brains to outsmart them and slaughter them. And there is something very anti-human about that, because humanity we have a physicality to us, and to reject that physicality is to be anti-human in a way, or to even be transhuman, to go beyond our physicality, to go into the realm of abstraction. Now, having said all that, I guess at this point in the video, people might be thinking, oh, you're approving of Ted Kaczynski, or you're approving of Alexander Dugin, or you're approving of anarcho-primitivism, or you're approving of agrarianism or traditionalism or third positionism or fourth position theory, whatever. I don't know. That's not the point. The point is to rise above this paradigm, to get a bird's eye view, and to really see what's going on here, to really see the forces at play, that we really do have a desire for all the obvious stuff, right? We want to be around people like ourselves because we want a cohesive community. We want sociality. We want commonality. We want connection. We want intimacy. We don't want to just be alone by ourselves, but we want to achieve some form of connectedness with the people around us, and it's a lot easier to do that when the people around you are similar to you. And we want tradition, so we don't just want continuity in the here and now, but we want continuity from the past, present, and future. We want to know that we are like our grandparents, and then our grandchildren will be like us. And so I understand conservatives and traditionalists. We should all understand them. We should all be sympathetic toward them, because this is a basic human need, a basic human desire to not be constantly schizophrenic, to just have some sort of stability in our worldview, in our sociality, how we're connected intergenerationally, how we're connected communally, how we're connected morally. All of these things are very important just in terms of not being completely insane, in terms of forming emotional attachments. Now, if you're a complete sociopath, this means nothing to you, but most people are not complete sociopaths. Most people make attachments. They form connections with the people around them. They like people who are like themselves, right? So this is something that's very natural to humanity, all right? We establish that as a basic defense of conservatism, but then we recognize that really the Zulu never had a chance. As much as I like martial arts, as much as I like a good spear fight, we're not going back to fighting with spears. Even if that was a more honorable form of combat, even if that was more beautiful in a way, even if that was more authentic to the human spirit, to the human instinct, to the human tradition, we can't go back to that. We can romanticize it, we can venerate it, we can fetishize it. And we can wish we could go back to that time, whether it's the Zulu or the Romans or the Germans or whatever. We want to go back to some time in the past, and sometimes we conceptualize that as the period of nationalism, or the period of tribalism, or the period of traditionalism, or the period of divinity, or the golden age. However we form that in our minds, we want to get back to this, but the truth is, we can't go back to that. We can't go back to that, because if we try to go back to that, we're going to be mowed down in the same way that the Zulu were mowed down. Now, some people, a la Spangler, might choose to be mowed down by the volcano of technology, or by the gunfire of the British. They might choose to take the path of the Roman centurion who stands at Vesuvius. They might choose to take the path of the Zulu and charge into British fire. But that is obviously not going to succeed. You know, that kind of attempt to reverse technological trends is not going to result in a victory over technology. It's just going to result in you being mowed down, and that's what we see. That's what we see for so many people. They're charging into battle and they're getting mowed down. The opiate crisis is mowing people down. Antinatalism is mowing people down. Suicide and depression and anxiety and fear, they're mowing people down. Pornography is mowing people down. I mean, literally, you're being mowed down into a grave. You're being mowed down into your obsession, into your addiction. Whether it's drugs, whether it's stimulants, whether it's pornography, eroticism, fetishism, the way that people fetishize the Third Reich, the way that people fetishize fascism, nationalism, Nordicism. People fetishize these things without ever taking action in real life, in the exact same way that people might masturbate repeatedly about naked women and never touch a woman in their whole lives, or very rarely, or there's a huge discrepancy there, right? We all understand this. We all understand what I'm talking about. And that is a kind of a self-destructive, self-suicidal mowing down of the self. You're preaching one thing, and then you're just a complete failure. You're not getting anywhere. You talk about how nationalism is sweeping the world, but all the trends are showing the exact opposite. And all of the supposed actors who are bringing us into a nationalist world, whether we're talking about Trump or Marine Le Pen or Viktor Orban, it doesn't matter. These people are clowns. These people are puppets. It's very transparent. But people have such a desire to delude themselves that they fool themselves into believing this is not the case. So it is sad. It is definitely sad, and we definitely live in a time of mass catastrophe. I mean, what's going on right now is, you can't even compare it to World War II. Like, the amount of people who are killing themselves, whether it's physically, spiritually, socially, people are eliminating themselves from the gene pool. They're eliminating themselves from communal life. They're eliminating themselves in terms of their power. They're giving up their power. They're abnegating. They're abdicating. They are throwing away their personalities and handing it over to capitalism. They are no longer the stewards of their own bodies. They're giving away their minds and their souls to corporations and to social media campaigns and protest movements and politics and all of these things that people obsess over, that they have no agency. They're giving up their agency. They're giving it over to this mass movement, which has nothing to do with them. They're being completely used as a puppet, and then when it's over, they're just thrown away, and they're probably not even going to have descendants. But if they do, their descendants aren't going to be like them at all, and so on and so forth. Like, we know where this is going, and we're retreading old ground here. But in defense of globalism, Zulu nationalism, it's a legitimate point that you have to confront this. You can't run away from this. You can't run, I'm just going to ignore this and go back to listening to military marches. I'm just going to ignore this and go back to looking at maps. I'm going to ignore this and go back to my street protests. I'm going to ignore this and watch porn. I'm going to ignore this and play video games. I'm going to ignore this and just listen to the same nationalist talking points over and over again. Oh, we're winning here, we're winning there, everything's good, everything's fine. And this complacency, this mass complacency. And what happens when these people take action? Random acts of terrorism, completely ineffectual, by the way, completely counterproductive, by the way. That's the most extreme thing. They'll talk, and then sometimes they'll be randomly violent toward innocent bystanders who have no influence whatsoever in any kind of policy making or any kind of decision making. I mean, at least the Serbians back prior to the First World War, the Black Hand, the Serbian terrorist group, at least they took out the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. I mean, he was an important guy. They didn't just kill random Austrians or anything like that. So this is like, and I guess stupid is the worst word that I'm allowed to use, but it's stupid. It's really stupid, and it's sad, and it's pathetic. But that is the extent of it. It's talk, say that somehow something is coming, something's going to happen to change the deep underlying economic conditions of globalism, and it's all going to work, and democracy is going to save us, mass movements are going to save us, populism is going to save us, which is ridiculous. And they'll talk, and then they'll commit random acts of violence. And that's the spectrum here for the nationalists. That is the spectrum from blabbering masturbation to violent masturbation. And there's nothing in this spectrum is actually changing the course of history. Nothing in this spectrum is actually challenging decision makers. Nothing in this spectrum is actually influencing policy, right? Nothing in the spectrum is changing the trajectory of civilization. The trajectory of civilization remains the same. We are more atomized. We are more global. We are more economized. We are more mercantile. We are more abstract. We are less physical. We are less communal. We're less intimate. All of these things continue to be the same. I mean, you look at Iran. Iran is the big enemy of the United States right now. So you would think, oh, well, I guess Iran must be traditionalist. They must be natalist. They must have a warrior ethos. You might project all these. You might, oh, well, the United States is one way, so Iran is another way. Iran is on the same path as the United States. Iran is liberalizing internally. Iran, in fact, has a low birth rate. They're below replacement rate, and they're decreasing. They have the same problem as every other European country. I mean, in my opinion, Iran is, to a degree, a European country. It shares much of the same linguistic roots as Europe. It shares a lot of the history. It shares a lot of tradition and philosophy and metaphysics. And Iran is going down the same path as every other European country, which is a type of physical suicide. So Iran is supposed to be the great enemy of the United States, and it's going in the same exact direction of the United States. The same thing with Russia. Russia is not... I saw this thing on... I don't like to go on Twitter, or let me rephrase that. I like to observe as a fly. I don't like to participate in Twitter. But I saw this thing on Twitter where someone said, oh, Putin has taken Russia, and he's converted it from 30% Christian to 80% Christian in like 20 years. That's just wrong. That's just false. That's a statistic that's a made-up statistic. That's from someone who's never been to Russia, never spoken to Russians, never actually looked at the data, never looked at church attendance, nothing. Never looked at like beliefs. Like if you poll Russians on, do you believe in God? Do you believe in the Eucharist? Do you believe in consubstant, or I don't know what the Orthodox terms they have. Maybe they don't believe in I think they do believe in consubstantiation in the Orthodox faith. But in any case, if you ask them specific questions, do you attend church? Right? Of course, identification as a Christian has increased. But that means nothing. We all know that. That means literally nothing. Identification as a Christian means nothing. Church participation is down. HIV and AIDS is up. Abortion is up. All of these things have increased under Putin. Putin is not saving anything. Putin is not fighting the global trajectory. He is overseeing the global trajectory. He is the babysitter. He is the nanny. He is the puppet that's put in charge to make it appear like everything's under control, guys, don't worry. In the next 10 years, the next 5 years, in the next 2 years, Putin's going to come out with the next step of his master plan to defeat globalism. It's a charade. It is a circus. It is a gladiator fight. Gladiator fights were attended by thousands of Romans, and they were obsessed with these gladiator fights. They would bet money on it. They would cheer the gladiators. They would have parades, whatever. They do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter who won. It didn't matter who lost, because it's just a gladiator fight. And the Cold War between America and Russia is just a gladiator fight. It's just there to amuse and to distract and to entertain the masses, make them feel like something's going on. But nothing is at stake. All of the countries of the world are on the same trajectory. So if you realize that, you can either fight against the current, you can fight against that trajectory. And if you are a Gnostic, if you don't believe in the material world, then that it's not necessarily a futile path. If you don't care about material wealth, if you don't care about material possessions, if you don't care about material success, but you believe in struggling against this power structure, that you're going to be reincarnated, or you're going to move to another plane or whatever, that somehow you're going to escape from the hellishness of this world by fighting against it, then if you can have faith in spiritualism, if you can have faith in the afterlife, if you can have faith in reincarnation, then there's a legitimate reason to fight against the current system. But if we're purely speaking materially, if we're speaking in terms of success and failure and what's possible, fighting against the system is masturbatory. It appeals to our instincts. It appeals to what feels good. It's not actually going to produce fundamental change. So the question I think people are wondering here is, well, what would produce a fundamental change? And the answer is nothing. So you really are faced with this question of, do you want to go full spiritualist, or do you want to go full materialist? Do you want to fight the world to escape the world, or do you want to accept the world, become a part of the world, master the world? It's kind of the distinction between an alchemist trying to understand the world, master the world, reach spirituality through mastery of material things, seeing material things as sort of the building block of spiritual things, or a synthesis between the two, or an indistinguishable, that there's no true separation, sort of a monist attitude. And then the dualism of Gnostics, who see the material world as something to escape to get into the spiritual world. And I don't think, reading this Pythagorean stuff, and I haven't kept up on it as much as I should. I've been really busy recently. But when I have nothing to do, I should really get back into it. But the concept of like a monad and a dyad, that those concepts aren't necessarily contradictory, or that they don't exclude one another. We can have the monistic perception where we say, really spiritual matters and material matters are intertwined, and you can't truly separate them. But then we can also go into the dyad, the dualist perspective, and say, there is sort of a distinction here between material things and physical things. There's this interplay between the singularity of the monad and the dynamic of the dyad, and the synthesis between the two we would call the trinity. We would call it, or the triad. The third position would be, well, monism, pure monism, is incoherent, because clearly there are distinctions. But pure dualism is incoherent because clearly there are unities, there are collectives, there are categories, right? So we can't be fully nominalistic in our dualism. We can't purely believe in a world of black and white where there are no categories, there are no heuristics. But we can't believe that the world is without distinction because we observe distinction, right? So both pure monism and pure dualism, they're not coherent. What's coherent is this constant interplay between monism and dualism, or you could even, in the scientific method, you could say it's the distinction between deduction and induction. You need both. You need both. So that's where Trinitarianism comes in, and that's why I like the idea of three classes, because it reflects, or it reinforces the importance of the number three. So, what are we doing here? That's my position. It's a Trinitarian position. It's not that we should fight the world and kill ourselves. And it's not that we should fully integrate into the world, but that we're in this back and forth between accepting the world, but then in order to accept the world, we need to master the world. In order to master the world, we need to distinguish ourselves, to make ourselves distinct from the world. Because to have domination over something, to subjugate something, we need to be distinct from it. Okay, well, to be distinct from it, we have to separate ourselves from it. To separate ourselves from it, we have to then create a dynamic where there's like the lower material world and the higher spiritual world. So these two things, there's an interplay, they kind of rely on one another. As you, like, if you set out a goal to, like, I'm going to defeat the globalists, well, you kind of have to become a globalist to be a globalist, fight fire with fire. And so in trying to defeat globalism, and trying to defeat technology or whatever, you have to use technology. In trying to defeat the evils of the world, you have to sort of take on the evils of the world. On the other hand, if you wanted to just become a globalist, if you wanted to just become a capitalist, at the same time, there is a degree of self-control that you need. And you start to realize that basic time preference is difficult to control. It's difficult to control the fact that, hey, we want to eat junk food, we want to watch porn, we want to chase members of the opposite sex, we want to engage in relationships that are momentarily beneficial or fill us with a sense of happiness, but in the long term are unhealthy. Or prioritization requires control of the will. And anytime we're talking about the will, we're talking about Schopenhauer. And anytime we're talking about the control of the will, we're talking about Hinduism, we're talking about Buddhism, we're talking about Christianity. To an extent, we're talking about Judaism. And we're talking about religion. Religion, the term to bind, is often thought of to bind together. So we think religio, to bind one person to another person. But often it's not thought religio, religion, can also mean to bind the will. That is, to control the will, to subjugate the will. So whether you're trying to be a Wall Street banker, or you're trying to be a priest, or whoever you're trying to be, whatever caste, whatever class you're trying to be here, there is this constant interplay between, yes, you're either embracing the world, but to embrace the world you need to fight it a little bit. In order to fight the world you need to embrace it a little bit. There's this constant interplay, and some people try to just purify themselves into one class. But the three classes, they're reliant on one another. Warriors still exist in these creatures we've created called technology. I mean, a gun, in a sense, is a highly complicated organism. And in a sense, it is a creature of its own. People name their guns, they obsess over these things because there is a beauty to them. They're violent, of course, but there is a beauty to them. They have a warrior spirit to them, to weapons. I mean, this is not something new. I mean, people have been treating swords this way for a long time. But weapons are becoming, they're gaining sentience. I mean, what do you think a drone is? A drone is what happens when a weapon begins to gain more and more of its own essence, of its own spirit, of its own independence. So humanity is just fobbing off the warrior class onto technology, and as it does, that technology will become more of its own independent class, and humanity will specialize in priestly matters and mercantile matters, but also computers can take over that as well. So it's not even to say humanity will be around forever, which is another reason that nationalism is a little bit silly. Again, unless you think like we're all going to die, and when we do, we're going to go to different planes in the universe depending on whether or not we fought the globalists. So that's one way to look at it. That kind of, it's all just a test. It's all a big video game. We're trying to get to the next reincarnation. I mean, that's one way to think about it. I can't disprove that. It's not falsifiable. But to these people who are saying, oh yeah, let's fight the globalists, who are atheists, these people are ridiculous. These people are beyond stupid. These people have nothing. I mean, what do they rely upon? They rely upon aesthetics, which is just masturbation. If aesthetics doesn't stand for anything deeper, then it is no better or no worse than anything else. It's arbitrary. And there's no substance to it. It's nihilistic. I'd almost rather be on the side of global mush, where people actually believe that they're bringing the world together, even if it's imperfect, even if it's ugly, whatever. I feel like there's real faith in globalism, whereas these and it's a very specific type of person, but these nationalists who claim to be atheists, and you push them and you say, well, what's behind your nationalism? They say, well, aesthetics. What's behind your aesthetics? Well, it's evolutionary psychology. Okay, well then why be, you're just a nihilist. And there's nothing of substance there. There's no faith. There's no telos. It's very empty. It's very shallow, and that's why it preoccupies itself with entertainment, and it preoccupies itself with current events, and it preoccupies itself with things of the moment, things which are exciting, things which are distracting. Escapism, essentially. It's an escapist hobby, disguising itself with these delusions of grandeur. So it's a topic that I've gone over many times, but it has to be hammered home that Zulu nationalism, that's what it is. And you need to reconcile yourself to globalism in one way or another. Either I guess again people can take that spiritual view, and maybe that one of the faults of this video is I'm so unwilling to take a position on that. I'm so unwilling to deny the possibility, because at the end of the day, I mean, why pursue globalism? I don't have a justification for people other than you will be successful. Like, you will be successful if you decide, if you understand globalism in a deep sense and you pursue it, you will have wealth, you will have power. It's very easy. You identify it, you run with it. It's very easy. It's not hard, it's not difficult. So you can do that, but why do that? Why do that? What's the purpose? At the end of the day, when you take this spiritual view, this perennial view, and you look at people around you and you look at yourself and you realize all this is transitory, we're all just going to die. What is the purpose of pursuing this wealth, this power, these riches? Why not fight against this system? Why not fight just for the fun of it? Because to go along with this system is soul crushing. It's just to fight for fun. Just to fight, with that Viking spirit, that Valhalla spirit, that endless struggle, the worship of endless struggle. That in itself gives us meaning, gives us value, gives us certitude that this is what life is about. This is who we are. We have confidence, we have faith, we have metaphysical understanding, we have grounding, and there's something to be said for that. But that's a very different perspective than the one that says, like, oh, well, nationalism is just practical and ethno-states are just the best states, which is hogwash. It's ridiculous. But there is something to be said for a certain kind of, and I'm bringing myself back a few years now, almost 5 years. No, more than that. Let me try to think. How long has it been? Thinking 2012, 2013. So that would be, how many years ago now? 7 years? 6 years? When you're truly like dissociating from the present moment, and you're thinking in terms of thousands of years and millions of years, and all of these ambitions and distinctions and everything, it just passes away before you. And so the concept of like gaining wealth in this world and storing up wealth, even intergenerational wealth, the idea of investing in this world just seems so futile. And just being a good person, being virtuous, pursuing aesthetics seems much more legitimate than to just build up wealth in this world. So basically what I'm arguing here is that if you're coming from a materialist perspective, you have to be a globalist. You have to be a globalist. I don't think there's any such thing as a self-consistent atheist who is also a nationalist. I think that these people are charlatans and they are money sharks and they are here to make a buck, and they're not to be trusted. I don't know. In the future, maybe I'll talk to some of these people, and maybe I'll be a little more polite than I'm being right now. But I think they're stupid, or they're intentionally deceiving people. They see nationalism as a good niche market to exploit, and that's it, because there's no correlation from A to B. I think the only successful defense of nationalism you can make is within a perennialist spiritual perspective, where you say, hey, this world is meaningless, and we should just be authentic to ourselves. We should be true to ourselves. There's no reason to continue the suffering of capitalism and globalism, where we just endlessly pursue the acquisition and the hoarding of wealth. No, we should live with an eye toward justice and virtue and aristocracy. And I think that would be a successful defense of nationalism. But I don't think the atheists make that. I think they just point to like evolutionary psychology, which doesn't get them where you think. I mean, these people think that like Darwinism implies social Darwinism, implies National Socialism, which is just very twisted logic. If you want to look at actual social Darwinism, look at what Nietzsche had to say, look at what Coudenhove-Kalergi had to say. These people actually understood social Darwinism. Sigmund Freud understood social Darwinism. There are a lot of people who have taken the concept of social Darwinism. Social Darwinism does not mean mass shootings. Social Darwinism does not mean individualism, necessarily. Social Darwinism means what we have now. Social Darwinism means and sorry about the airplane. Social Darwinism means that you have a system of democracy that fools people, that deceives people, and that leads them down a path of self-destruction. Rather than having to destroy them, you allow them to destroy themselves through illusions of democracy. So democracy is the true ultimate social Darwinist system. So if you describe yourself as a social Darwinist, you actually understand what Darwin's theory of evolution is, and you understand the state that we're in. You'll understand that democracy is the most social Darwinist state of government of all. It's not National Socialism, it's not fascism, it's not formalism, it's not any of that. So I think that's all for now. Repetitive video I've done a million times before, but I still can't help shake that I haven't done enough to really solidify this concept in people's minds. And maybe I just have to delete all my old videos. Maybe I just have to take some time, delete all my old videos, and start from here. Start from this new beginning. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.